They saw a tax auditor. They had no idea they were looking at a mistake they couldn't afford to make. My brother in law's wedding was held at a vineyard outside Niagara on the lake, one of those places that charges $300 a head for dinner and makes everyone feel like they've arrived somewhere. The kind of venue that exists specifically to impress people who care about being impressed. I drove up from Ottawa alone. I'd taken Friday off, which cost me, because I don't take Fridays off lightly. When you work where I work, a day off has a way of compounding. But my sister was getting married. So I went. My sister. I'll call her what she's always called herself around family. The one who made it. Married a man named Elliot, who'd made a comfortable living flipping commercial real estate in the GTA. He was charming in the way that men with money learn to be charming, and he genuinely seemed to love her. And I tried to hold on to that thought the whole weekend because it was the most generous one available to me. I want to be fair about my family. My mother grew up in Sudbury during the kind of years that left a mark, and she raised us to believe that visible success was the only kind worth having. A good car, a house in the right neighborhood, a job people recognized when you said it at a dinner party. She wasn't cruel. She just had a very narrow definition of what mattered, and she applied it without apology to everyone she loved. My job did not fit that definition. I work for the Canada Revenue Agency. I have worked there for 11 years. I started as an auditor, spent 4 years in the Complex Investigations Division, and for the last 3 years, I have been the director of a unit that I am not, technically, supposed to discuss in detail. What I can tell you is that my team handles cases involving sophisticated financial structures. The kind that take years to untangle. The kind that end with people losing more than their reputations. I have sat across tables from people who believed, genuinely believed, that they were untouchable. I have watched those beliefs revise themselves in real time. My family knew I worked for the CRA. What they understood from that was, she does taxes. I had stopped correcting them years ago. There's a version of that decision that sounds noble. I'm not someone who needs external validation. I know what I do. That's enough. So that version is partially true. The other part is simpler. They weren't listening anyway. I arrived at the venue on a Friday evening. The rehearsal dinner was in a private room at the back of the main building, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, and a menu that described everything in 3 languages. My mother hugged me at the door and immediately assessed what I was wearing, which was a navy blazer and dark trousers, which apparently communicated something to her because her second sentence was, "You couldn't find anything more festive?" "It's a rehearsal dinner," I said. Still. She patted my arm. "You've always been so serious." My aunt was at the bar when I got there, talking loudly to someone I didn't recognize about cottage prices in Muskoka. My cousin, my mother's sister's son, the one who'd started a landscaping company in Barrie, and spent most family gatherings implying that anyone who worked indoors was somehow suspect, waved at me from across the room with Maya's drink. "A few people look," he called out. I smiled. Elliot's family was clustered near the windows. His older brother, a man I'll call the one who did the introducing later, was there with his wife. His parents were there. A few friends from his commercial real estate world, people who radiated the specific energy of someone who has recently refinanced something. Elliot himself came over to greet me first, which I respected. He was warm. He asked about the drive, asked whether I'd tried the Riesling, asked what I was working on these days. And when I said something vague about financial investigations, he nodded in a way that suggested he either understood or was polite enough to act like it. My sister appeared behind him a moment later, slid her arm through his, and redirected the conversation to the seating chart. The dinner itself was fine. The food was genuinely excellent. Beet salad, Ontario lamb, a dessert involving ice wine that I'm still thinking about. I sat beside my mother and across from my aunt and spent most of the meal being updated on things I hadn't asked about. Who had sold their condo, who was renovating, who had been offered a position in Calgary and turned it down. At some point, someone asked me directly what it was like working for the government. "Stable," my cousin said, before I could answer, and laughed. She does paperwork at the CRA, my mother said, with the tone of someone offering an explanation rather than a boast. Very steady. Benefits. Benefits, my aunt repeated, nodding as though settled something. I picked up my wine glass. I set it back down. I thought about the case I had left on my desk in Ottawa. A network of shell companies that had moved approximately $40 million through 3 jurisdictions over 6 years, and the very specific satisfaction of watching it collapse. And I said nothing. After dinner, standing near the fireplace with a second glass of the Riesling, my sister came to find me. This was the moment I had been half expecting since I arrived, the way you expect weather you've already felt changing. You know, she said, in the voice she used when she was about to say something she wanted to sound casual, Elliot's family keeps asking what you do. And I tell them you work for the CRA, and they look at me like, she made a face. I just mean, you could have done something with your degree. You're so smart. It's a little. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. She'd been not finishing that sentence for about a decade. I like my job, I said. I know you like it. I just mean. She glanced around. Elliot's brother works in international finance. His friends are all you know. And you show up and you work for the government and you do paperwork. I don't know. It's fine. She touched my arm. Never mind. Enjoy the wine. She went back to her new family. I stood by the fireplace for a while longer. I did not sleep well that night, not because I was hurt exactly. I'd built scar tissue over this particular wound a long time ago. It was more that the scar tissue had a way of aching in certain weather. And the weather at that vineyard with those Edison bulbs and that lamb and my sister's embarrassed sideways almost sentence was Amnu's sentence was exactly the kind. The wedding was on Saturday afternoon. It was beautiful, objectively. The vineyard rose behind the ceremony space, the late September light coming in at that particular autumn angle that makes everything look like it was art-directed. My sister looked happy. That part was real. Whatever complicated feelings I'd carried into the weekend, she looked genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy standing there, and I held on to that. The reception began around 6. There was a cocktail hour first, the string quartet, the small plates, the photos against the grape arbor. I circulated. I talked to people I didn't know about things that didn't matter. I'm not bad at small talk when I apply myself. I've sat in enough interview rooms to understand the mechanics of making someone comfortable. Elliot's brother. I'll call him what he was that evening. The one who changed the temperature of the room found me near the charcuterie at some point during cocktail hour. He was tall, that kind of handshake that tells you something about a person's professional context before they've said a word. He'd been pointed out, too. He worked in financial crimes compliance for one of the larger banks. I'd been told. His name was Sebastian. We started talking. Not about the wedding exactly, but around it, the way adults do when they're feeling each other out. He asked where I was based. I said Ottawa. He said he split time between Toronto and London. I asked what he did, and he explained it. AML, anti-money laundering, large institutional compliance, and something in the way I responded must have registered, because he paused. You know this space, he said. Not a question. I told him where I worked. Not vaguely the way I had at dinner. I told him my division, my role. I mentioned briefly the kind of work we did. He went quiet for a moment in the way that specific kind of professional goes quiet when they recognize a counterpart. I've read about your unit, he said. The Maple Bridge case last year? I can't confirm that, I said. He smiled. Of course. A pause. We almost seconded one of your people for a cross-border thing in 2022. Or tried to. I remember that conversation, I said. And I did. I'd been on the other end of it. We kept talking. I didn't think much of it. It was the first genuinely interesting conversation I'd had since arriving in Niagara, and I was grateful for it. What I didn't know was that my mother and my sister were standing approximately 15 feet away. We were called in for dinner not long after. The reception space was enormous, the tables arranged under the vaulted ceiling, candlelight everywhere. I found my seat, which was at a family table that also included my aunt. My cousin, a family friend of my parents who I've known since childhood, and one of my sister's friends from university. The speeches started around 8. Elliot's best man was funny and mercifully brief. My mother cried through the whole thing, which was appropriate. My sister's maid of honor spoke well and quoted something that sounded vaguely like a poem but might have been a social media caption. Then Elliot's brother stood up. He hadn't been scheduled to speak. I gathered later that he'd asked during cocktail hour if he might say a few words, and Elliot had agreed. Sebastian tapped his glass. The room settled. He talked first about Elliot, about growing up together in Waterloo, about their parents, about the particular relief of watching your sibling find the right person. He was good at this. He spoke the way people speak when they've spent years reading rooms. Then he paused. I want to say something else, he said. I had a conversation this evening that I won't forget quickly. I was introduced to the bride's sister. The room shifted. I felt it before I understood it. I was told she works for the government, does paperwork. He smiled, and it was a specific kind of smile, not unkind but precise. I'm going to tell you what she actually does because I don't think everyone here knows, and I think they should. My mother's head turned. She's the director of a financial crimes unit at the CRA that is, in the industry I work in, genuinely feared. The cases her team handles, the scale, the complexity. I work with people at FinTrack, at OSFI, at institutions across the country, and the name of her division comes up in rooms she's never in. He looked at me across the candlelit tables. I want to raise a glass to the bride. And I want to say to the bride's sister, I've wanted to buy you a drink for 3 years based on your case record alone. So thank you for finally being in the same room. He raised his glass. The room did the same. I did not look at my mother. I looked at the tablecloth and counted my breath and held the glass and let the moment happen around me without trying to control it. This is something I've learned. In interview rooms and hearing chambers and conversations in hallways where the ground is shifting. Sometimes you hold still and let the room reorganize itself. After the toast, people came over. Elliot's parents, a friend of the family who turned out to have a son in the RCMP, one of my sister's friends who worked in healthcare compliance and wanted to ask about a specific regulation. They came over in the way people come over when something has been reclassified in their mental filing system and they need to update the record. My aunt said, I didn't realize you were so important. My cousin, the landscaper from Barrie, said nothing at all. My mother found me during the first dance. The lights had gone low, the band had started, and she appeared beside me with her champagne glass held at a particular angle I recognized from a lifetime of reading her. You never told us, she said. I did tell you, I said. In different words over many years. She was quiet for a moment. The band was playing something that might have been a Fleetwood Mac song rendered unrecognizable by tasteful orchestration. I always thought. Huh? She started. I know what you thought, I said. Not harshly, just factually. She nodded, slowly. She looked at my sister on the dance floor, at Elliot holding her, at the life she was beginning. She looked back at me. I'm proud of you, she said. I think I've always been proud of you. I just didn't understand it. There's a difference between those two things, I said. But thank you. I danced once with Elliot's father, who turned out to be a retired civil engineer and a genuinely lovely conversationalist. I had another glass of the Riesling. I said goodnight to my sister around 11, and she held on a beat. Longer than expected. And I let her. I drove back to my hotel in Niagara Falls, the less glamorous, more affordable end of the strip, because I am a government employee with a reasonable per diem and no performance bonus, and I sat in the parking lot for a moment before going in. Sebastian had texted me during the reception. A professional follow-up, something about a cross-jurisdictional group, an invitation to connect with someone at his institution in the new year. Completely standard. The kind of message I get from people I meet at industry events. But it had arrived at a table where my mother could see my phone light up, and she had seen his name, and she'd asked quietly while I was reading it who that was. Elliot's brother, I said. He seems to think very highly of you, she said. We work in adjacent fields, I said. He's good at his job. He said your name in that toast like he'd been waiting to meet you. He'd read some case files, I said. That's all. She didn't say anything else. I don't think she needed to. I think that was the moment the translation happened. Not dramatically, not with tears or an apology or a scene, just quietly. My mother recalibrating. The way Waters finds the level it was always going to find given time. I've thought about that parking lot moment a lot since then. The drive home to Ottawa the next morning was 5 hours, and I had a lot of time to think. I thought about the 11 years I'd spent building something I couldn't fully describe at family dinners. I thought about the cases that had taken years, the financial structures that had looked like walls until they didn't. I thought about the particular loneliness of doing work that matters in rooms where no one outside them knows it's happening. I thought about what Sebastian said in that toast. Not the complimentary parts, which embarrassed me, but the one thing underneath all of it that he probably didn't realize he'd said. I've wanted to buy you a drink for 3 years based on your case record alone. 3 years. Based on the record. Not because of a title on a business card. Not because of what someone said at a dinner party. Because of the actual work, which exists whether or not anyone at a vineyard wedding knows about it. That's the thing about doing the real thing. It doesn't need you to announce it. It just sits there in the record waiting for the right room to be in. I got home on Sunday evening. There was a file on my desk. Well, technically in my secure email, but I think of it as my desk. That needed my attention first thing Monday morning. A new referral. 3 holding companies, 2 jurisdictions, 1 very long paper trail. I made tea, I opened the file, I got to work. That's all it's ever been, really. That's all it needs to be.